All right, wonderful. So before we get started on the actual presentation, I just want to give a brief introduction. Gabby, are you, okay, there you go. Thank you for that. So hello everyone and welcome. My name is Brianna Lee Ortiz. I am the Partnerships and Training Manager at Boston Partners in Education. We also have some other staff members here, so I just want to give a quick shout out to you all. We have Sarah, which is our program director, if you want to just wave at everyone. We have Erin here with us today, which is our executive director. Eva is also on the call. She's our senior partnerships manager. And I think I see Claire here with us today. And she is a partnerships manager working with ILS. So if you want to wave as well. And if there's anyone else on the call that I'm missing, you can also just wave. Sorry if I miss you. But yes, so going on with our introductions, I'm really excited to have you all here with us today to discuss the idea on how to take a holistic approach to student learning. We have Tina Kondopoulos with us today. She is the director of the peer tutoring program at Northeastern University, and Gabby Hernandez, a PTP College Reading and Learning Association certified peer tutor, and she is also a Boston Partners mentor as well. The goal of this presentation is to explore Weinstein's theoretical framework model of strategic learning and to put it into practice in order to enhance our students' learning potential. So I will now give the mic to both of them to continue on their introductions and to get started with the presentation for today.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're all having a good evening. My name is Gabby, just like Brianna Lee said, and I have had the pleasure of serving both Northeastern's peer tutoring program and being part of BPIE. So I've gotten to mentor both college students and first graders alike.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tina Kondopoulos, as Brianna Lee stated. I'm the director of the peer tutoring program at Northeastern University. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present today. We are looking forward to a wonderful and fruitful partnership between BPIE and the peer tutoring program at Northeastern. This is our first part of many series of workshops, I hope, that we can collaborate with. I would like to briefly talk about the peer tutoring program at Northeastern. The peer tutoring program, or PTP as we refer, is a free tutoring program mostly offering tutoring for entry-level college courses to all undergraduate Northeastern students. The peer tutoring program hires high achieving Northeastern undergraduate students and pays them to offer tutoring services to our students. PTP is also College Reading and Learning Association, abbreviation CRLA, certified tutoring program in all 3 levels, and offers tutor training based on best practice and standards set forth by both CRLA and the Council for the Advancement of Standards, CAS. We also offer our peer tutors a pathway to CRLA tutor certification in all 3 levels by providing both synchronous tutor training through face-to-face and in-person workshops, as well as asynchronous tutor training through the CRLA Canvas course for each of the levels of certification. Gabby is one of our peer tutors who has been with our program for a number of years, and she has achieved CRLA certification. She's currently working towards her CRLA level 3, which is the top, top level of tutor certification. I'm very proud to support her during this presentation. After all, you will see it's her presentation, and it will count towards her leadership part of the requirement of the CRLA level 3 certification. She will be presenting, as Brianna Lee said, on a holistic approach to student learning. And so because we are recognizing that the learners are multidimensional and complex, and so the best fitted model for teaching our students of how to learn has to be a multidimensional approach. And so today, Gabby is going to talk about the Weinstein's model of strategic learning, a three-dimensional model, and has also built some activities into the presentation. How do we learn? Let's go back to my roots, which if you don't recognize them, they're Greek. And so Aristotle said that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So what is the role of an educator, of a mentor, of a tutor, of a coach? Is the role of us will be to help our students set good habits of mind. And so how do we do that? We do that with many interventions. One is being a mentor or a tutor or a coach or a teacher, whatever your role in students learning, it has, and whatever the intervention you're going to use, it has to be intentional, which means that it has to be deliberate. You have to plan for it. It also has to be purposeful. It has to have a meaning. In order to have, it has to have a value for the participant in order to be more effective and in order to be more impactful, meaning to increase the outcomes, the learning outcomes for our learners, their competencies, and most importantly, to be able to set good habits of mind in their learning process and practice. So at this point, I will turn it over to Gabby.
Yeah, so as we've mentioned a few times now, we're going to pretty much follow Weinstein's model of strategic learning, which, as Tina mentioned, is this three-dimensional approach to participating in mentorship and tutoring of three-dimensional learners or holistic learners. And I'll go through all of these things individually, but to give you a brief overview of the triangulation, skill has to do with knowledge, right? The knowledge before and after a session and how that impacts a learner's approach to a strategy for learning. We also will talk about will, which, as many of you probably already know, has to do with motivation. So how do we get our learners involved in their learning strategies as well? And how do we get them interested and engaged in the material they're learning about? And finally, self-regulation. This can come in many different forms. A lot of times we talk about this with time management, which is very key to both holding a session with your mentee or tutee, and it's key to teaching this as well as a mentor, because this is an important key to success in learning any subject. And a lot of times, the reason why I wanted to do this presentation is because we use this for college students in the peer tutoring program at Northeastern. But I think it was actually a very helpful topic that I learned about to apply to working with first graders with BPIE, even though you think that those two groups are pretty far apart from each other, which they were. My sessions with the first graders were very different than my general chemistry sessions with freshmen, but a lot of the same skills came in handy. So I thought I would bring this over to partners in education as well. So we're going to start by talking about skill. And the way Weinstein looks at this is in a form of different learning strategies. So how can we approach a subject to be the most successful for our learners? And Weinstein also breaks it down into active and passive learning, which I'm sure many of you have thought about before, maybe in your own subject learning abilities. A lot of times when we're studying for something, we can get into a passive mindset where we take the strategies that we've used, but we don't use them very well. So we're not actually learning much. The same can happen to our mentees and our tutees. So it's very important that we execute these strategies in an active way, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So one of the strategies that Weinstein brings up is rehearsal strategies. which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, right? Flashcards, definition repetition, listening to recordings. But you can see how something like this could get repetitive or passive, right? So it's important to find ways to make these dynamic activities with our learners, right? So not just taking a set of flashcards and doing that every single session. Because even though it might be successful in the first few sessions, it's not really going to help a learner grow beyond the set of concepts that are in those flashcards. Instead, Weinstein suggests maybe executing a research strategy where we take this repetition, but you also repetitively look up to and dive deeper into the concept you're looking in. I definitely encourage this with some of the general biology students I work with, where sure we have flashcards, you know, what's a receptor, what's a cell, what's a molecule, but it's better for them to ask these questions to themselves, you know, okay, this is the definition of a cell, but what does this really mean? And does the definition change? So that's a very good way of executing this in a more active way. Another strategy is elaboration in our sessions. So this is asking your learner, your mentee, you know, this is how I explain something to you. How about you explain it back to me in a different way? And this executes paraphrasing and summarizing strategies. Analogy is also a very important way to engage a learner in the skill dimension of Weinstein's model, because sometimes when you're dealing with things that your mentee has never heard of before, right? Say you're talking about calculus or algebra, and these are completely new concepts to them, having an analogy to something they experience every day is a lot more successful. We see this a lot with problem solving in terms of math, because I'm talking about math, in the sense that, oh, you go to the grocery store, how many apples do you need to buy? How do you calculate the price? How do you calculate pounds of apples? So putting it in real life situations for mentees is a very successful way of engaging their skill. You can also encourage them to come up with their own analogies and make sure that it fits to the concept you're learning about. But by coming up with their own analogies, they're actively participating and understanding the meaning of the concept you're teaching them. Also, having your mentees teach you the subject is very important. So when I was working with my first graders, a lot of what we were doing was phonetics and spelling and storytelling. So I would ask them, you know, how would you pronounce this word? Like, teach me how to sound out this word. And by doing that, they're pretty much just teaching themselves. It's kind of like a Russian doll trick. So that's a very good way of getting into elaboration strategies. Finally, the last skill that we would like to focus on is organization, which I'm sure many of you are also knowledgeable on. But this is creating outlines, mind maps, diagrams of the concepts that you're working with your mentee. And if you've never seen a mind map before, we have a picture of it right there. It's a mind map of mind mapping. And essentially what you do is you take a central idea and you try to break it down further and further into parts. And this kind of mimics how our brains think anyway, right? We have the knowledge of one thing and then we break it down into many parts. And by doing this and by physicalizing this process, right? I think with technology nowadays, our learners are very used to typing things out and staring at a screen and just trying to press that into their brain. I know that's what I do. I'm a student right now too. So sometimes I'm like, oh, if I just look at the slide hard enough for long enough, it will make sense to me. But that's definitely not the case for holistic learners. Instead, you want them actively participating in their learning by creating diagrams that make sense to them and creating mind maps where the knowledge of the subject they've learned connects in a way that enhances how they understand the subject, not how the subject is just taught to them. It kind of functions as an elaboration strategy as well. So this covers Weinstein's skill dimension. The next thing I'd like to talk about is will, otherwise motivation. And this is probably very common in a lot of your sessions, especially if you were tutoring or mentoring during the pandemic over Zoom and working with younger students as well. Motivation is a challenge, that's for sure. But I found a few strategies during my time working with first graders on how to get them engaged even through the computer. So the first thing is bringing enthusiasm to your subject as a teacher. Sometimes it's hard for students to be interested in doing spelling for 45 minutes. But if you're really excited about spelling or biology or calculus, they're automatically, it's almost infectious. They're going to be excited about spelling as well. And this way, in this way, they are engaged as well. So if you're in the screen, you know, leaning towards them, telling them in a bright, colorful voice how excited you are to teach them this thing, they're more likely to be connected to you as well in the session. So the other thing is agency and self-direction in the subject. Now, this can be a little difficult with younger learners. I think we have this idea with older learners, like, okay, what are you looking for in this? What have you done in the past that hasn't worked towards your learning strategies? Or what have you done in the past that caused you to want more help in this subject, right? Reflective learning is really important because, like we talked about with some of these skill strategies, engaging in the concept itself and having a personal attachment is extremely influential in engaging the learner. So teaching them how to reflect on their learning is important as well. So this is good for young elementary and secondary school mentees, especially because in high school, I feel like you start to learn how to reflect on your learning. But for the younger students, you want to ask them at the end of their sessions very deliberately to get them engaged in reflection. So with my first graders, you know, I'd be like, okay, how did you feel telling a persuasive story today? Do you think you could do that again? Like, are you going to persuade your parents in this story later on? And then coming into the next session, asking them again, you know, do you feel like you could spell faster? Like, how did that make you feel? And reflecting on it allows them to be more engaged in their learning outside of a session as well. Now, finally, we're going to get to a little bit of an activity, and some of you may have heard of SMART goals, and some of you may not have. But SMART goals are a very important piece to this dimension of Weinstein's model, and they work for all ages, even though sometimes we think of this as just an adult strategy for establishing goals. It's also kind of topical because, you know, we're getting closer to New Year's, and a lot of times we see our New Year's resolutions fail because the goals aren't fitting, or they're not measurable, or they're not timely. And SMART goals aim to fix this habit. We've all gotten in, and our mentees have gotten in, of setting goals that just are never going to work out because we didn't set them in a structured way that motivates us towards completing them. So if you haven't heard of a SMART goal before, essentially it's an acronym, and it's for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based goals, which sounds like a lot, but really does funnel a goal into a way that you can achieve it. It's not just some abstract idea. So the first thing is specific, right? So with learners, a lot of time they could come into a session and they say, I just want to get better grades. Don't we all? Instead, you want them to pick something a little more specific, right? If you're working with your mentee on, say, biology, right? And they're struggling with maybe the memorization aspect of all this biology concept you're typically thrown at, you could help them define a specific goal as, oh, I want to do better on my next test, right? And then you want your goal to be measurable, right? So saying you want to be better at something is very abstract and doesn't really have any actual meaning. If it's a test, you can do it on a grading system or a point system. You know, I would like to do 10 points better than I did on my last test, right? Or if you're working with younger mentees and they're not necessarily doing a testing system yet, for example, like the first graders, you could help them set SMART goals and, oh, so we want to do better on spelling, right? How are we going to measure that? How about we'll be able to spell 100 more words by the end of our semester together, or 50 more words, or we'll be able to do spelling for a whole session and we won't get any of them wrong. Something like that, where you can get to the end of the semester, or you can get to the end of your year with a mentee and know whether or not you've achieved it or not necessarily for yourself as a mentor, but for the mentee to see that progress has been made and the goal has been achieved. Also, obviously, you want your goals to be attainable, right? So if you have the most common example for this is like people who set exercise goals at the beginning of the year, like I want to exercise 7 days a week. For a lot of us, that's just not going to happen, right? Nobody has time in their day. Same can go for mentees, right? Maybe they say, I want to be an expert on biology by the end of this year. I want to know everything there is to know. Obviously, that's not going to be achieved. So that makes a goal not as meaningful as it can be when you pick something that's specifically attainable. You want it to be relevant, which makes sense. You want it to be something in regards to what you and the mentee are working with. So if they want to do better in another class and you're not there to help them with that class, you could refer them to another mentor or another tutor. But otherwise, you want to pick something that you can help them achieve. And finally, time-based, right? It's very important to set a timeline for these goals so you know when to check in on whether or not they have achieved them or not. So now we are going to throw you guys in a break. Also, let me know if you have any questions about how to set SMART goals. But we're going to do a quick activity where we're going to give you like 5 minutes or so. And I want you to try and create a SMART goal that's specifically tailored to the age group that you work with, whether that's elementary students, secondary students, high school students. Try to think about what a SMART goal would be to them, how you could phrase it to them, right? If you tell a first grader their goal has to be attainable, they're going to ask you what's attainable, right? So try to make it so that it makes sense for your mentee, and then make a goal. And then we'll come back and we'll share a few of our ideas once we're done in our breakout rooms.
Robert and Miriam, are you guys having trouble getting into the breakout room?
No. I'm here.
This is not, wait, Sarah, were they assigned to a room? You're muted. Technically, this is not a breakout room.
I just moved Robert and Miriam to a room.
So if you all can just join the room, you should have gone. Oh, there you go.
I put Miriam in room.
Oh,
She
there you
goes.
go. All right. And I see that Gabby joined the room. Maybe that's for the best.
Yeah, I can't pull her out. How long for the breakout session?
I believe it's 8 minutes.
5
Tina,
minutes. 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay.
It is 5 minutes for the, give them a little time to, they were supposed to introduce themselves. Gabby should have said, introduce yourself, and then get to they have to agree to what, goal is it, whatever group they are mentoring, because I'm sure they are mixed.
Mm-hmm.
So
they are.
They have to agree. She also had to say, you have to pick a leader, and then the leader has to report, but it's okay. Listen,
Okay.
She's doing great, don't you think?
Yes.
Constantina, she's so awesome. She has so much energy. You both do.
That's my group. My group are very passionate, and especially my my level 3. All my level 3 peer tutors have a leadership project that they chose to do.
That's so great.
Yeah, Gabby loves you guys. Like, she had a wonderful experience with the group, and that's why she chose this particular one. She proposed it.
Hi, Stephanie. were you able to get into a breakout room?
I just left. I didn't realize I would be popped into the this pool. I haven't met my student yet, so it feels really awkward to be in that breakout room yet. She was absent for 2 Fridays in a row, and so we haven't met.
Well,
Okay.
welcome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
welcome. Have you gotten in contact with your partnerships manager to speak on the matter?
Well, somebody contacted me, and I emailed them back today, and so I haven't heard back from them. But they were saying, how was it? And I was saying, well, it hasn't happened yet. So
Okay. All right. And then has the teacher gotten in contact with the student?
I don't know. I mean, I have to assume yes, but I can't really say.
Okay. All right, wonderful. Well, if you do have any other questions or concerns, please reach out to the partnerships manager that got in contact with you today.
The
so
partnerships
you guys
manager?
can- yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And they can see what's going on with your mentee.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I do
Um,
know, Stephanie, that there's so many kids out in the Boston Public Schools right now. I'm a parent with 2 kids in BPS, and I
Uh-huh.
get so many calls about kids being absent and kids being
Huh.
close contact because of COVID.
Oh,
It's a big deal. There's a lot, if you have a close contact, then you have to pull your kid out. It's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
lot of absences, unfortunately.
good to know. Anyway.
all right, but yeah, if you just want to hold off a second, I believe that everyone else has 2 more minutes in the breakout room, and then we're gonna join back into the presentation.
Okay, great.
Is this your first year, Stephanie, being a
Well,
mentor?
sort of, kind of. Last year I volunteered for 4 weeks in a row. There was 1 snow day, and he was absent for 3 other days, and he didn't ever show up. So I never met him either. So,
Yeah. You started during a very interesting time.
yeah. Well, actually, that was one of the reasons that I volunteered last year, was because it was all remote, and so I thought it was going to be easier. And actually, I'm in Sudbury, and so driving into Roxbury is about a half an hour drive. So that's I wasn't really envisioning driving into Boston, but then it became in person this year, and I'm like, well, okay, So
Mhm. That's really nice. That's pretty far, Sudbury to Boston to come.
it is a little far. Well, actually, yeah. I mean, I just have never made that drive. I mean, I hardly ever go into Boston. I come into Cambridge occasionally, but I don't go into Boston. So it was new and different for me to try that, and it was good to see that it was sort of doable. It was not too scary, because I don't know. I'm at that age where getting on the highway is actually a little bit intimidating.
Mm. I'm gonna close the rooms now, so everybody's gonna be coming back in the next 50 seconds or so. Well, hopefully, Stephanie, things will make a turn for the better, and that you'll see your student and continue the work that the volunteerism that you wanted to do and why you're here.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone want to start sharing some of the ideas? Oh, we only have 9 people back. We'll give it a few more seconds for people to get back. Maybe I'll stop sharing so people can see each other. Neat. Now that we're mostly back together, does anyone want to share some of the ideas they came up with in their sessions? Maybe we can start with people that work with high school students. What kind of SMART goals did you come up with for the subjects that you're working with your mentees with?
Yeah. I guess I could share one of I guess some of the stuff that kind of came up in my breakout room. But basically, for the smart goals, I guess I think when it comes to math, and especially with like the setting that my tutoring kind of happens, it's a little different to set a long-term smart goal, but it's more about finding something more short-term where, you know, if a student has like a particular problem, maybe at first I work with them and we're kind of like diving into the problem together, but hopefully by the time, you know, they get to the fifth problem that's similar, that they're able to kind of work on it on their own. So maybe something that seems a little more attainable, at least for like a goal that's for that particular day.
How to get done is a good goal to have. Very easy to measure.
Yeah, I'll add, in my situation, teaching is trying to teach the student test taking strategies to help them do better on tests. In my day, we used to call it testmanship. We let the test things in the test actually help you figure out what the right answer is, particularly on multiple choice tests.
Do you have any like general strategies for how you teach test taking tips to students, or how you measure how well students are doing their test taking tips?
Well, I'll give you just one very specific instance. If you have a problem where it's an algebra problem and they give you some equations and they ask which of the following four answers is correct, well, you don't actually have to go and solve the equations and go through all that tediousness. Just look at the four answers, start at number one, plug the answers in and see if they work. And you can usually quickly eliminate 3 out of the 4. And if you're lucky and it's the first one, you're done.
I've definitely used that strategy on some of my tests. What about people that work with secondary students? I have not myself worked with that many middle school students, so I'd like to hear what some of the goals are that those kids typically have. Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
I have a lot of experience working with middle school students, and I'm tutoring one with this program. And generally what I do, and this is what I'd said in the group, is I will ask them to come to me with what they want to accomplish in a session. And I try to always see if they have homework that they need to do, and then work on the homework for a while. See if they're working on, it's language instruction. And this is a Spanish, he's taking Spanish, this child, and work on what vocabulary does he have to learn? Does he have any assessments that he's recently taken, and spend some time going over them, because kids very often get papers handed back that might have corrections on them, but no one ever looks at them. They just like take them, stick them in their bag. And so it's useful to learn from mistakes that were made. I try to find out what they're about to be learning and to try to preview material with them so that they go in with a sense of confidence. I try to give them an opportunity to ask any questions they might have, because often there are misconceptions and misunderstandings, and they've been embarrassed to ask the question because they know the teacher already answered that, or the teacher made them feel dumb for asking a question, so they don't want to ask questions. And a goal, and I share the goal with them, is that I want to build up their confidence so that they can go into class knowing the material that's ready for tomorrow, that they know it, they have a good sense of understanding it.
Yeah, I think that kind of falls into self-reflection, being able to teach that to mentees, because just looking back on tests and learning from your mistakes is a huge, huge step in getting into more complex materials. Yeah. Any other experiences from menteeing, goals for mentees that are in the secondary school age? How about, yeah.
I'll mention that when I work with students virtually, usually I ask them to show me their folder or their notebook. I said, take out your notebook. I want to see it. Because I'll say, what, do you have a problem? If they don't have a problem, they might say, I'm not sure. I don't, they're kind of vague. So I said, okay. take out your notebook. Let me see, open up your notebook, open up to the last page, most recent page. Let's take a look at it. Then all of a sudden,
Boom.
then you get something to work with right away.
Yeah. I have that issue with college students a lot, where they'll come to me with a class and they'll just say, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, well, I'm not your lecturer, so I can't just teach you biology all over again. So let's look at the slides and figure out where exactly you're
There you
confused.
go.
And that's part of setting a goal for a session. What specifically are we going to talk about today? Because that makes it a lot easier for the mentor and the mentee.
Yeah.
What about you guys that work with elementary students? What does setting a SMART goal look like for a third grader or a first grader?
Oh, they usually have lesson plans. So they're there's a series of questions that they have to get through. So that's the structure with the fifth and sixth grader that I tutor.
Good. Yeah. What about other folks that work with maybe students even younger than fifth and sixth grade? How do you get those kids to set goals, and what do they look like for them?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think you could be more sorry. So I work with 4 and 5-year-olds. So as I said when we broke out groups, you can't really set a long-term goal because they're never going to get that. It's just setting the goal when you walk in the door and what you're going to do for that hour. That's that's goal period. And I just focus on whatever the teacher is working on, like if it's handwriting or something, or if it's like, and of course a smile and make them feel engaged and excited about it. And I like to use funny terminology, like I call it floating letters. When they don't put the letters on the page, I say, oh, I love that, great, but can we try not to have the letters float so much? Let's get it on the line. They need to be on the pavement, you know what I mean? The sidewalk. So, and by doing that, I get them to, but yeah, when you're working with really little kids, you can't approach it that way because they're not gonna understand.
No, but it's good to start by just telling them that you've set a goal for the session too. That definitely keeps them on task.
Right, yes.
Great. So that's great. I'm glad you guys got to engage with that idea a little bit. So we're going to talk about the last dimension of Weinstein's model, and we kind of discussed it a little bit as well with our conversation. See, let me get my slides to change. There we go. So the final dimension that Weinstein brings up is self-regulation. And a lot of you talked about this, right? Starting to get your students to develop a structure for themselves outside of your sessions and how that helps them be more successful. So a lot of the times we think of this as time management. So the first thing you want to evaluate with your sessions are how long are they and what are the structure of them. So in the peer tutoring program, we teach students to engage, or we teach the tutors to engage in a beginning, middle, and end structure, where in the beginning you have some sort of greeting, you essentially like slide them into the session, like, hello, how are you? How was your weekend? So it's not just cut and dry to the business, because this is going to help them engage a little bit more with you. Then you have a middle. And I forgot to mention in the beginning, it's also important to set that goal, right? To engage that motivation by letting them know, what are we going to achieve in this time? And what are we going to achieve in the long term? If you're working with students that think in the long term like that. So once you get that initial engagement into the session, the middle part is going to be achieving that goal, right? Whether it's working on a problem, going through a lesson plan, making sure students stay on task in that middle part of the session, and then having an end where it's, engaging in the will dimension, where you have self-reflection and reflecting on how the learning went during the session, whether that be, how did you feel learning how to spell a new word? Or do you feel like you can say a sentence in Spanish? Or reflecting on, do you think you could take this math problem and do it on the test, right? So having that closeout to the session is really important. Now this time management idea becomes really important when you're dealing with younger students, as I'm sure many of you know, especially working with 4 and 5-year-olds. And you want to make sure that you're breaking out your sessions into time periods that your students can actually maintain attention for. So for example, when I was working with the first graders, they were not able to sit still in front of a Zoom call for an hour at a time. So typically what we would do is we would do the beginning part of our session. You know, I'd hear about how grandma was the past weekend, and then we would do 10 minutes of a spelling activity and have a dance break, and then 10 minutes of a storytelling activity and do another dance break. And in this way, the students were still engaged in the full hour and we still got to our goals, but they definitely felt like they were able to get that energy out that they were not being able to get out in the activity itself. And, you know, back to the will dimension, you want to engage with them as well if you're trying to structure your sessions so that they get those breaks, but you want to still be there with them. So for example, I would be on my lunch break at work working with these first graders, and I'd be getting up in the conference room and dancing to the Disney song that they wanted to listen to during the session, which helped them want to stay engaged with me when we transitioned back into spelling. Finally, this is an important dimension and skill that you want to be able to teach to older mentees. A lot of you talked about, or one of you talked about the essay that you wanted to get your student to write, right? And you want to make sure that students are able to set goals for themselves, right? You want, especially the older mentees, to be able to create SMART goals, but also know how to regulate their time around those SMART goals. And a lot of this is something you can teach during a session where you say, okay, you have 15 minutes, write up what you are just thinking about this essay topic. And then at the end of the 15 minutes, we're going to read it over and fix it and see if it fits what the essay is asking for, make sure it's grammatically correct, make sure it's structurally correct. And by integrating this self-regulation into your session itself, it teaches the mentees to take it outside of the session as well. Whether it's a first grader who's like, got to get the homework done, I'm going to do a dance break in the middle of these homework assignments, or it's a student working on an essay and they know they can't just write for an hour straight. So instead they do the 15 minutes on, 5 minutes of reflection, 10 minutes off, or something like that. So just to summarize a lot of what we talked about in this presentation, we talked about initially, you know, any intervention, Tina talked about this, any intervention that you bring into your sessions from this training should be intentional. So make sure you really understand what your mentee needs from you in a session and try to pick out what strategies fit the best for math, for biology, for a first grader, for Spanish learning, because not everything's going to work for every holistic learner. Also, being able to set SMART goals for your students and yourself. So teaching the students how to set goals that are actually attainable for your sessions, but also, you know, trying to engage in using SMART goals for yourself. You know, what do you want to get out of volunteering with these students, or just using SMART goals for the new year? I know I will be. And then finally, practicing reflective learning is a very impactful way to make our sessions with our mentees and our tutees a lot more important outside of the 1 hour session we have with them. So making sure that your tutees know how to reflect on their learning and what it means to them, and making sure that that's something that they take value out of as well. But thank you all very much for your time and engaging in the activity. I appreciated it, and I hope you got a little bit from this presentation. Now, if you have any questions for Tina or I about Weinstein's model or just tutoring and mentoring in general, please let us know.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to mention, I was telling Erin this in my breakout room. I'm having trouble with my mentee because she's not showing up consistently. And just by watching this presentation, I think I'm going to focus on organization skills with her. So maybe that'll help her to show up more often.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge, that self-regulation of students, wanting them to keep coming back to you and trying to get that meaningful experience out of the sessions. I definitely understand that. I've got college students that will show up once a month and I'm like, hun, this is not going to help you learn biology. Anybody else have any questions or any thoughts they'd like to mention?
I had a question I asked in my breakout room. And I was just wondering if anybody who tutors students like shoulder to shoulder, or anyone who's not virtually tutoring students, do they ask them if they are vaccinated? Anyone have any? Would you ask the student that you're sitting with if they're vaccinated or not? Would you want to ask them that?
Can you ask them that? Is it a HIPAA?
Can
thing?
I
don't
ask
know.
them that?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
nodding your head, Sarah. Why are you shaking your head?
I'm shaking my head because students aren't supposed to, it's a privacy thing, right? So
Right.
I think that's, I have 2 kids in Boston Public Schools and one of them's vaccinated. And I know, the push is to try and get all of them vaccinated. My child's school just had a vaccination clinic this evening. And I also know that families have to make hard decisions, and some families are choosing one thing for their kids and other families are choosing others. So I would just refrain from those conversations.
How did you know that the student that you mentioned was vaccinated? You said you mentioned one of your students is vaccinated. How do you know that?
My daughter.
One of our
Oh,
children.
good.
Yeah.
You've got
I will
it
say,
now. All right.
I will say with Northeastern students, so we're all required to be vaccinated, but
Right.
initially at the beginning of the semester, when we went back to doing in-person sessions, I had a lot of students that would just like wear their mask very willy-nilly around their face. And
Really? Huh.
that made me very uncomfortable for my health. And I'm not particularly a person that's at risk for COVID, but for
Right.
people that are, I think you have every right to tell. And this is something that Tina had to tell me because I was like, oh, I don't want to be mean to them. I don't want them to hate me. But Tina was like, no, like your health is a top priority, and it's not going to affect them to ask them to just put their mask on for the session.
Well, 5th and 6th graders aren't 12 years old yet, so
Yeah.
they may not be able to be vaccinated.
Yep.
And I'm working very closely, shoulder to shoulder, like Robert was saying. In order to read the screen on their computer, I've got to get very close to them. But everybody wears a mask. I wear a mask.
Yeah,
And,
that's good.
Yeah.
Not to contradict you, David, but they 5-year-olds and up can now be vaccinated.
Oh, okay. All right. Good to know. Thanks.
I did see there was another question in the chat. Do you have suggestions for SMART goals that apply to mentoring an elementary school reader?
Yeah, definitely. So there's definitely a way to frame SMART goals so that they don't sound so adult, I guess you could say, or complicated. For example, with my first graders, we wouldn't write it all out or outline it all, but at the beginning of your session, or maybe within the first few sessions you've had with this elementary school reader, I would just ask them, do you want to get better at reading? Like, what do you like to read? And try to pick something that first is specific, right? So if they want to get better at reading chapter books or picture books, or maybe there's like, I know when I was growing up, there was like a set of like 1, 2, 3, 4 level books for reading levels. So maybe trying to figure out, where they want to go with that. You can set time-based and measurable goals with them as well. So, I want to finish one book during this session, or I want you to read me a whole book during this session. Or by the time we get back, you can back together, you can explain to me the book that you read while we were apart. And then like we talked about, elementary school students, we're not thinking long-term here. We're thinking, what's the SMART goal for the session, or what's the SMART goal for the week? And I think that can, even though you're not calling them SMART goals and they might not be as structured as writing them out, I think that can be really meaningful for having good sessions and good time with the first graders or the elementary school readers as well.
If I could add something, another thing you can do is work with the teacher to identify some of the goals and then kind of bring that down for the level of understanding for the students. So for example, I'm working with someone on their handwriting, and so the teacher has put together some worksheets for us, and so our goal for the day might just be to do one worksheet, right? We'll just practice the letter J for the session. But we also break it up so that I'm working with him for 15 minutes and then other children for 15 minutes because that is the attention span of first grade.
Yeah. And even if it's just riding the leather J for 15 minutes, that sounds pretty specific to me.
Yeah, I was going to say she just brought up a point of work with the teacher, contact the teacher when you're dealing with your mentee and see what the teacher has to say if the teacher has any suggestions.
I'd also suggest in short sections around a reading to ask the student if she or he will read something aloud, say a paragraph. And then you learn a lot by listening to a student read the sentences aloud. You hear the places where the structure of the sentence itself is really not working to help the student figure out what it means. And you can find a focus when you listen to somebody reading aloud where the issues of comprehension are. The other thing I would say really quickly, if you're working on, a short section of a reading, is just to ask the student what stands out, what's interesting, what do they notice about what he or she just read. And if they say what they noticed, that begins a dialogue that takes you back to the reading. Where did you notice it? What in the sentence helps you notice this? And that back and forth between the student's initial observation of something interesting or significant or note something that they noticed really allows you to keep going back to the text. And it's that going back to the text that is the key to improving reading, because the only way you get better as a reader is to reread. But you don't really want to hammer away at rereading. You get to rereading through dialogue based on what the mentee finds interesting.
Definitely. I also love the suggestions in the chat as well. Picture books, repetition. We see repetition so commonly with elementary school students. So we know already that it's a good strategy for learning, especially early in the years of reading. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, Brianna, it's all you.
Sorry, can you all hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, wonderful. Internet just cut off a bit, but thank you all so much. Thank you, Tina and Gabby, for a wonderful presentation. Can we just have like a virtual round of applause for them both? So I want to close off our presentation by thank you all for taking the time to attend this month's mental development session. We really are striving to create a fun yet educational virtual environment for you all to attend and really learn more about your roles as mentors. In the chat, we actually will be dropping a link to the Mentors Facebook group where you're able to obtain any resources, find out about upcoming events, and just share any stories that you guys may be encountering when you are working with your mentees. We also do have our website with the volunteer resource page, which will be updated with any resources that you all may need. And then you also do have your partnerships manager that you can always reach out to for any further information. I also do want to add that we do have a newsletter that goes out every month for you all. And we do have a January mentor development session happening. And it will be a focus group. So if you all have any questions, if you want to share more about the stories that you guys have with your mentees, or just want to help us learn how to better help you, please join us for that. Please stay attentive. We will be sending out dates, RSVP messages, emails, and we will be dropping that in the Facebook group. But yeah, once again, thank you all for attending, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great night.